Steve, throughout your career, you were known predominantly as a power pitcher, relying on the fastball, curveball, and slider. I think most people feel as though that overpowering slider is really what made you the dominant pitcher you were during the 70s and 80s.
I always had great control with my fastball. I always worked the corners very well, and my slider would come out of the same slot as my fastball, and it would give the appearance, because the spin was so tight, of the fastball until at the end when it would dive out of the strike zone. I get a lot of check swing.
Pete Rose said it plain. He was a beast. And when Pete Rose, the greatest contact hitter who ever lived, the man who squeezed out more hits than anyone in baseball history by a wide margin, says that about a pitcher, everything stops. You listen. Rose scratched and clawed for every hit across 24 brutal years. He trusted his eyes more than any batter who ever played the game. But Steve Carlton broke those eyes. He made Pete Rose, of all people, feel completely helpless at the plate. And Rose was not alone. 9 of the greatest hitters who ever played the game each tried to find the right words for that feeling. 9 Hall of Famers, 9 different stories, and every single one of them arrives at the same uncomfortable place. How did one quiet lefty make the best hitters alive feel like they never had a chance at all? Before we go any further, if this video is hitting the right notes, go ahead and use the hype feature and give it some hype right now. It only takes a second, and it means more than you know. Now let us get into it, because the answer is not a simple one. What Steve Carlton built was something with 3 separate layers all working together at exactly the same time. His slider, his body, his silence. Each one of those 3 things alone would have made him dangerous. All 3 combined made him something the game had never quite seen before and has not seen since. A pitcher who won not just with his arm but with his mind, his muscles, and a carefully constructed psychological campaign that started the moment opposing hitters opened their eyes on the morning they were scheduled to face him. But to truly understand the weight of who Carlton was, you have to go back to 1972, because 1972 is where everything becomes almost impossible to explain to someone who was not there. The Philadelphia Phillies were a complete disaster. There is no kind way to say it. They finished that season with 97 losses. They sat 37.5 games out of first place. They were one of the worst franchises in baseball, a roster that looked like it had no present worth mentioning and a very uncertain future. Fans in Philadelphia had very little to show up for. The organization was in a rebuilding process that was not going well by any measure. In a normal year, a team like that disappears into the back of the standings. You circle their games on your schedule as guaranteed wins and move on without thinking twice. But something happened in Philadelphia that year that nobody in baseball could stop watching. Steve Carlton had just arrived by trade from the St. Louis Cardinals. And the story behind that trade is one of those baseball facts that still makes people stop and blink when they hear it for the first time. The entire thing came down to a contract disagreement over $15,000. That is the number. A $15,000 separated the Cardinals from keeping one of the most dominant pitchers on the planet wearing their uniform. They could not close that $15,000 gap. Carlton was gone. Baseball historians call that transaction one of the most lopsided trades in the history of professional sports. Once you see what Carlton did next, that description starts to feel like it does not go far enough to capture what actually happened. He won 27 games that year. His earned run average was 1.97. He struck out 310 hitters. He pitched 346 innings. He finished 30 of his 41 starts as the complete game winner. He led the entire National League in wins, earned run average, strikeouts, innings pitched, and complete games all at the same time. That is the pitcher's triple crown, plus everything attached around the outside of it. He was not just the best in the league. He was operating in a completely separate category from every other pitcher on the leaderboard. Here is the number that puts it all in perspective. The Phillies won 59 games total that entire season. Carlton personally won 27 of them. He accounted for nearly 46% of every single win his team earned across 6 months of baseball. His personal winning percentage was .730. The rest of the Philadelphia pitching staff, every other arm in that organization combined, won at a percentage of .269. Carlton was not carrying the team on his back. Carlton was the only reason that franchise had anything to talk about. Without him, the 1972 Phillies were one of the worst collections of baseball players assembled in the modern era. On his day, they were a team nobody wanted to face. In opposing clubhouses, players gave Carlton's start day a name. They called it Win Day, not as a compliment, as a resignation, as an admission made before the game even began. In a 4-game series against the 1972 Phillies, an opposing team figured they were taking 3 with relative comfort. But on Carlton's day, you were going to lose. The best managers in the game had accepted this fact and built their series strategies around it. The best hitters had accepted it too, and there was genuinely nothing anyone could do to change it. That kind of certainty, that level of dread built into a single day on the schedule, is something almost no pitcher in baseball history has ever manufactured. Carlton manufactured it every 5 days for an entire season against an entire league. Carlton got stronger as games progressed. George Foster, one of the most feared power hitters of his his era and a cornerstone of the Cincinnati Reds lineup, noticed this specifically and never forgot it. Unlike elite starters who typically saw their stuff fade noticeably after 100 pitches, Carlton appeared to actually gain momentum as innings accumulated. His 30 complete games that season represent a number no pitcher has approached since. Not in the decades that immediately followed. Not in any decade after that. Nobody has come close. It is a number that is aged not as a high bar to chase, but as something from an entirely different world. He even contributed at the plate. He beat Hall of Famer Bob Gibson in a shutout and went 2 for 3 himself at bat in that same game. On August 9th, 1972, he hit a home run while shutting out the Pittsburgh Pirates 2-0. You could not hit him. You could not stop him from scoring runs on his own. The terror was comprehensive and it covered every inch of the field. Carlton's teammates felt the difference too. When Carlton took the mound, the whole team expected to win. Larry Bowa recalled that no matter how difficult things had been, no matter how the club had been playing in the days before, they knew that on Carlton's day, they were likely going to win. He would pitch deep into the game and give up almost nothing. That kind of certainty from a single pitcher is almost impossible to manufacture. Carlton provided it as a matter of routine. Now let us get to the weapon that made all of this possible. The pitch that 9 Hall of Famers still describe as if they are revisiting a long, strange dream that never quite made sense. The pitch that Carlton's longtime catcher Tim McCarver famously called the dime spin, the slider that changed what baseball believed a breaking ball could do. Before Carlton came along, the slider was treated as a second-tier pitch. Something to mix in, a variation without the prestige or effectiveness of a true breaking ball. Most pitchers and coaches considered it a lesser version of the sweeping curveball, a shortcut option that serious pitchers were not supposed to lean on. Carlton took that pitch and turned it into the most feared weapon in baseball by doing something nobody had done before, at that velocity with that kind of movement happening that late in the flight. He threw it over 50% of the time in certain seasons. He built his entire identity around it. And by doing so, he forced hitters to reconsider their entire relationship with the strike zone every single time they faced him. It started in 1968 with a man named Sadaharu Oh. Oh was a Japanese baseball legend and one of the most disciplined and technically precise hitters the game had ever produced. Carlton gave up 2 home runs to him. It burned. He went away thinking about it. If even the most patient and excellently trained hitters in the world could find a way to time his pitches with enough preparation, he needed something that was fundamentally impossible to time. A pitch that would look like one thing for almost its entire journey and become something else at the last possible moment. He began refining a grip that would make that happen with maximum velocity and minimum warning. The result was the dime spin. Picture a coin spinning perfectly flat and tight on a table. Not wobbling, not tilting, just rotating as cleanly and precisely as physics allows. That is the kind of rotation Carlton put on his slider. Completely controlled, extremely fast. And that spin created a break so late and so sharp that it rewrote what hitters believed was humanly possible to track with the human eye. Here is the simple version of how it worked. Carlton threw the ball and it looked like a fastball the entire way to the plate. Same arm speed, same release point, the same trajectory toward the strike zone. A hitter processed every visual cue available in the fraction of a second. The flight allowed and concluded. Fastball. The swing began. Everything the hitter had trained since childhood was engaged and in motion. Then, about 15 to 20 feet from home plate, the ball snapped in a different direction. Not gradually, not in a wide sweeping arc. A hard, sudden, sharp break, and the swing was already committed, already past the point of return. The bat was going to miss the ball, and there was nothing to be done. Carlton applied off-center pressure with his middle finger against the seam and released it like turning a doorknob. The combination of high velocity and precise rotation kept the ball behaving like a fastball for almost the entire flight, and then made it something else right at the moment it mattered most. Pete Rose described it as looking like a strike until the very last microsecond. That was not colorful language. That was a precise description of what Carlton had engineered. A pitch built to deliver incorrect information to the hitter's brain at the exact moment when there was no longer any time to correct it. Carlton threw that slider over 50% of the time in certain seasons. Even knowing it was coming did not help, because it still looked exactly like a fastball on the way. It still snapped at the last fraction of a second. It still required a physical response in less time than any human body can produce one. The gap between knowing and reacting was exactly where Carlton operated, and that gap was wide enough to humiliate 9 Hall of Famers on a regular basis. Now it is time to meet those 9 men. These were not ordinary players. These were the finest hitters of an entire generation, and not a single one of them found a consistent answer for Steve Carlton. Number 9, Mike Schmidt. Mike Schmidt watched Carlton dismantle opposing lineups from 90 feet away at third base for years. He had the best view in the stadium for every pitch, every reaction, every walk back to the dugout. And Schmidt said something that tells you more about Carlton than any single statistic does. He said he was genuinely thankful that he never had to face Steve Carlton in a real competitive game. Not that Carlton Carlton was impressive. Not that he respected Carlton's stuff. Thankful, relieved, the way a person feels when something dangerous passes close by and misses them. That is a profound thing to hear from a Hall of Fame hitter. Schmidt was one of the finest third basemen who ever played. He handled elite pitching his entire career and had the numbers to prove it. And yet watching Carlton take apart lineup after lineup from the infield was enough to make him count himself lucky for wearing the same uniform. He called the slider a nasty piece of business. He described hitters walking back to the dugout not angry, not fired up, but genuinely confused, like a person who reached out for something solid and their hand went right through it. Real confusion about what had happened to them. That confused expression, repeated on the best hitters in the game, was something Schmidt watched up close for years. He was grateful he only ever saw it from the outside. Number 8. Joe Morgan. Joe Morgan was the tactical brain of the Cincinnati Reds. He won back-to-back Most Valuable Player awards and was one of the most patient, disciplined, and intellectually precise hitters the game has ever produced. Against most pitchers, Morgan arrived at the plate with information already gathered. He had studied their body language. He had tracked their emotional tells. He had assembled small advantages from the way a man holds his glove or shifts his weight on the rubber. Against Carlton, there was nothing to gather. No information was available. Carlton showed nothing, said nothing, gave nothing away before, during, or after any at-bat, any inning, or any game. Morgan said the silent approach created a daunting atmosphere in high-pressure moments. You could not find the human target inside the opponent. You could not locate the place where Carlton was vulnerable or nervous or beatable in the way that all humans are somewhere. There was just silence and the slider and nothing else. Morgan hit .264 against Carlton in 127 plate appearances and struck out 13 times. For a man who built his entire game around patience and protecting the strike zone, Carlton forced him into at-bats that were more aggressive and less carefully constructed than his natural game allowed. Even Morgan's best performances against Carlton were subtly different from what he was at his best. Carlton changed the way Morgan had to play, and that alone is a meaningful form of dominance over a hitter of that caliber. Number 7. Dave Winfield. Dave Winfield was a physical force on any baseball field he walked onto. 6'6", powerfully built, a supreme athlete operating in a game already full of elite athletes. The kind of player who shifted the energy in a stadium just by arriving. And yet Carlton's combination of physical presence and total psychological silence produced something that Winfield found genuinely unsettling in a way that he could not easily explain or dismiss. Winfield described feeling not challenged but ignored. Not like Carlton was trying to beat him, like Carlton was doing something entirely different, and Winfield happened to be standing in the space between the mound and the catcher's mitt, like a minor inconvenience in a much larger exercise that Carlton was conducting for his own purposes. Carlton stood 6'4" and moved with the fluid, liquid power that came from years of martial arts training and conditioning work that was ahead of its time. His face showed nothing across 9 innings. His posture gave nothing away. Winfield said that stoic, silent presence added pressure that was just as real as any fastball he faced. Because competing against something that refuses to acknowledge you as a threat removes the frame of reference hitters rely on to feel like an equal in the competition. Carlton had no interest in giving hitters that frame. He was there to execute a task, and you were an obstacle he had already solved before the game began. Number 6. George Foster. George Foster was the feared heart of the Big Red Machine lineup. In 1977, he hit 52 home runs. He was the hitter opposing pitchers thought about when trying to construct a game plan, the bat that changed how entire defenses were aligned. Carlton neutralized him consistently for as long as they faced each other. In 148 plate appearances against Carlton, Foster hit .250 with 36 strikeouts. Sub .250 might look survivable in print, but for George Foster, a man capable of hitting over .300 with elite power production against most of the pitchers in the league, that represented a steady and significant reduction in what he was able to do. And 36 strikeouts in 148 plate appearances reflects a rate far above Foster's normal output against anyone else. The slider was working exactly as designed, making a great hitter see a strike, commit to a swing, and find only empty air. Foster noticed the late inning quality that separated Carlton from every other great pitcher he faced across a long career. Most hitters survive against elite starters by waiting for the velocity to dip just slightly in the 7th or for the slider to hang just a little in the 8th. Those small reductions in sharpness are where great hitters find their moments of opportunity. Against Carlton, that moment never arrived. He got stronger. Every inning delivered the same precision as the one before it. Every at-bat in the 9th carried the same force as the ones in the 1st. There was no waiting him out. The game ended with Carlton still at full power and the hitters still no closer to a solution than they had been 3 hours earlier. Number 5. Rod Carew. Rod Carew won 7 batting titles. He He is considered one of the greatest pure hitters who ever lived, a man with bat control so refined that he could guide the ball to nearly any part of the field at will and make adjustments mid-swing that other hitters could not manage even when standing still. He studied pitchers obsessively and adapted in ways that coaches spent entire careers trying to teach. Against Carlton, all of that extraordinary skill ran into something that bent the usual rules of what hitting is and how it works. Carew's specific problem was not just that the slider was excellent, it was that there were multiple sliders. Most pitchers have one out pitch, one weapon they reach for when the situation demands a strikeout. A disciplined hitter who correctly identifies that the out pitch is coming still has a real chance. Carlton had several different versions of the same slider, and every single version came out of his hand looking completely identical. Same arm angle, same grip appearance, same path through the early part of the flight, but one version would drop straight down, another would cut sharply to the arm side, another would do a combination of both at different depths. And because you could not tell which version was coming until the ball was already past you, correctly guessing slider still left you guessing which slider. You were making one guess inside another guess. Carew said most pitchers gave him one problem to solve. Carlton gave him several problems wearing the same face, and they changed every time without warning. Number 4, Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench was the finest catcher of his era and one of the greatest who ever played the position in the entire history of the game. He understood pitching from the inside because he called pitches for a living. He shaped at-bats. He studied pitchers from the receiving end and processed what he saw with the kind of analytical mind that most pitchers themselves never reached. And he described facing Carlton as a chess match, in which Carlton held every piece on the board while Bench was trying to survive the opening moves without losing his most important pieces. The specific thing that terrified Bench the most was Carlton's command of the slider in any count and any situation. In baseball, hitters use the count as a navigation tool. 2 balls and no strikes is a hitter's count. The pitcher needs a strike. He is almost certainly throwing a fastball. The smart hitter sits on it, looks for it, times it up. That educated guess is the most reliable tool a hitter has when facing a difficult pitcher. Carlton removed it entirely. Bench noted that Carlton could throw his slider for a strike regardless of what the count said. 2-0, here comes the slider. 3-1, same answer. Carlton did not follow conventional pitching logic because his command was so complete that conventional logic simply did not constrain him. He could use his best pitch in any situation and trust it to land exactly where he wanted. That left Bench and every other hitter in a permanent state of guessing, with no information to guide the guess. Every count was effectively a full count. Every pitch carried maximum uncertainty, and Carlton loved every second of it. Number 3, Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson built his entire legacy on rising to the occasion when the biggest stages and the highest pressure arrived. He thrived in moments that broke other players. He had faced the hardest throwers alive, the craftiest veterans, the most dangerous breaking balls the sport could produce in his era, and he had delivered against all of them when it mattered most. He was fiercely proud of that record and had earned every bit of the pride he carried. And he still looked back at Steve Carlton during his prime years in the late 1970s and said one word: unhittable. Not the toughest he ever faced, not the most challenging pitcher in his experience, essentially unhittable. Reggie Jackson, who delivered some of the most iconic postseason at-bats in baseball history and finished with 563 career home runs, looked at Carlton's slider during those prime seasons and admitted there was simply nothing available to do with it. That statement carries extraordinary weight given its source. Jackson was not a man who gave ground easily or made excuses for himself in public conversation. He was proud, competitive, and had the performance record to back up both qualities without any doubt. When Reggie Jackson says a pitch cannot be hit, the discussion is closed. Number 2, Pete Rose. Pete Rose holds the all-time record for career hits in Major League Baseball. Over 4,000 of them gathered across a career that spanned 24 years of professional competition. He batted over .300 for the large majority of those years, and he scraped and fought for every single number in that total. His whole game was built on trusting his eyes completely and acting on the instincts that decades of watching pitches leave hands and tracking them toward the plate had built into his nervous system. And he called Steve Carlton the greatest left-handed pitcher he ever faced. Not one of the greatest. The greatest. No qualifications, no hedging. The greatest. Rose's problem with Carlton was located entirely in his eyes. And for Pete Rose, that was the most disorienting and unsettling experience he ever had at a baseball field, because those same eyes had delivered more hits than any player in the history of the game. The ball left Carlton's hand and Rose's brain said fastball. Every single visual cue confirmed it. The arm speed was right. The release angle matched. The trajectory toward the plate was exactly where a fastball was supposed to go. Rose would commit. His swing would start, and the ball would arrive somewhere else entirely. He described it as looking like a strike until the very last microsecond. That final sliver of a second before impact is too short for even the most gifted hitting brain ever developed to register new information and make a physical adjustment in response. The same eyes guys that had produced over 4,000 professional hits across a quarter century of relentless, grinding competition were being deliberately and consistently deceived by Carlton's grip and Carlton's spin and Carlton's release. There was nothing to study harder, nothing to change about his approach. Carlton had built a pitch that operated in the space between what a human eye can perceive and what a human body can respond to in time. And that space was exactly wide enough to make Pete Rose feel like he had no idea what was happening. Number 1, Willie Stargell. Willie Stargell was a big man in every way that matters in baseball. 6'2", 225 pounds. Built like someone had set out to design the ideal power hitter and then kept going a little further just to be sure. He was calm at the plate in a way that made other great hitters study him from the dugout. He was a leader and a presence, the kind of player that an entire organization shaped its identity around for more than a decade. He hit 475 career home runs. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame on his first ballot. He played with a quiet confidence and a dignity that made you want to watch him, even when he was just standing in the on-deck circle, taking in the situation, taking his time. And he gave us the single most famous and most perfect sentence ever spoken about what it felt like to stand in against Steve Carlton. Stargell said that hitting against Steve Carlton was like trying to eat soup with a fork. Read that slowly, because it is not just a memorable line. It is the most precise description of a particular kind of structured impossibility that has ever been attached to a baseball pitcher. You can sit down at that table, you can bring your best fork, you can bring everything you have ever developed across a Hall of Fame career, all the talent and preparation and determination and experience that carried you to 475 home runs and a bronze plaque in Cooperstown. And the soup is still going to slip right through, not because you are not good enough, not because you made a mistake or lost your focus in the critical moment, but because the tool in your hand is the wrong tool for this specific task. The fork will never hold the soup. That is not a failure of effort. That is the structure of the situation, and the situation was built so that you could not win no matter what you brought to it. That is what it felt like to face Steve Carlton's slider. Stargell was not simply outmatched. He was placed in a situation that Carlton had engineered from the grip, to the release, to the spin, to the break, to be impossible to solve with the tools a hitter has available. In 127 plate appearances against Carlton, Stargell batted .262 and struck out 33 times. He did manage 5 home runs. Great pitchers give up home runs to great hitters sometimes, but for every moment of success, there were multiple at-bats that ended the same way. Something that looked like a strike, a swing, empty air, a walk back to the dugout, and somewhere in those walks back, the search for the words that would eventually land perfectly. Soup with a fork, the most accurate 6 words ever used to describe Steve Carlton. Stargell found them, and they will outlast everything else either man ever did on a baseball field. Now you understand the slider, but the slider did not operate by itself. It worked because of 2 other things running underneath it, like a foundation that never cracked across 24 years. The silence and the body. In 1973, Carlton stopped talking to the media entirely, not became more selective, not cut back his availability, stopped completely and kept it that way for over a decade. Reporters got nothing from him. No quotes, no interviews, no glimpses into his thinking before or after starts. Most people at the time found it strange or took it personal. But Carlton was not being difficult. He was performing a calculated removal of something he considered a competitive risk. Information is a weapon in any competition. When you speak publicly, you give the opposition something to work with. They can hear your voice and detect your emotional state. Coaches can read your words and pass them to hitters on the bus ride over. You become a person they understand. Persons can be beaten. Carlton had absolutely no interest in becoming someone opposing hitters could relate to. The Phillies actually constructed a $15,000 soundproof room next to the clubhouse specifically for him. They called it the Mood Behavior Room. Before every start, Carlton would go in alone, sit in an easy chair, and stare at a painting for hours. He practiced Eastern philosophy and meditation. He described it as achieving a mind free from distraction. By the time he walked to the mound, there was nothing in his head except the task in front of him. No crowd noise, no emotional residue, no static from the outside world, just pitching and the complete certainty of how to execute it better than anyone alive. Richie Ashburn called him a craftsman who painted his games with the precision of a masterpiece. Joe Morgan said the silence created a daunting atmosphere in high-pressure moments. Dave Winfield said Carlton's stoic demeanor added psychological pressure that was as real as the velocity. Because the human brain searches for the human in an opponent. It needs a crack, a flinch, some sign that the person across the competition is also a person with doubts and vulnerabilities. Carlton gave you nothing. He was a locked door with no handle. Hitters carried that silence with them to the plate, and the weight of it made an already impossible task harder. Under trainer Gus Hoefling, Carlton built his body into something baseball had never seen before. While other players in the 1970s and 1980s were doing standard conditioning, Carlton worked with the precision of an athlete from a future era. The program combined martial arts, strength training, and specialized handwork that was decades ahead of what the sport had standardized. The centerpiece was the rice bucket. Carlton plunged his left arm into a bucket of rice and performed twisting, gripping exercises over and over. The resistance came from every angle simultaneously, building the stabilizing muscles in his hand and forearm to a degree his contemporaries could not match. Those are exactly the muscles responsible for the snap at the end of a slider. More snap produces more spin. More spin produces later break. A later break produces 9 Hall of Famers standing in the batter's box with nothing left to try. His martial arts training gave him explosive leg drive and mechanical efficiency that modern pitching coaches now teach as the correct model. His delivery was described as liquid. He generated power from his lower body and protected his arm across workloads that broke other pitchers. That is why Carlton got stronger in late innings. That is why the slider still snapped in the 8th inning exactly as it did in the first. That is why hitters waiting for him to fade always went home having waited for nothing. Bring the whole picture together now. Late innings, Carlton on the mound, stronger than the first inning, silent all day, face empty of anything readable, body still loose and moving like a martial artist. And the slider still loaded in his hand, still ready to look like a fastball for 45 feet and then vanish at the last possible moment. 9 Hall of Famers all tried to find an answer for that picture. Not one of them did consistently. George Foster hit .250 against Carlton with 36 strikeouts across 148 plate appearances. Joe Morgan was pushed into at-bats that did not fit his natural patient game. Willie Stargell struck out 33 times in 127 plate appearances. These were not ordinary players on bad nights. These were the best hitters in baseball being held consistently and significantly below their own standards by a single pitcher with a plan they could not unravel no matter how many times they faced it. Carlton pitched for 24 seasons. He won 4 Cy Young Awards in 1972, 1977, 1980, and 1982, becoming the first pitcher in baseball history to reach 4 of them. His career ended with 329 wins and 4,136 strikeouts, placing him 4th all-time. He faced Willie Mays and Hank Aaron when he was still very young. He dominated Pete Rose and Johnny Bench in his prime. He was still effective against Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs when he was older. 3 generations of great hitters all had to find their own individual way to deal with Steve Carlton. Most of them never did, and as his fastball naturally slowed with age, Carlton adapted by leaning harder on his intelligence, his command, and the full variety of his breaking pitches. He simply found new ways to be the same kind of problem for hitters who thought that time might finally be working in their favor. It never was. When Carlton was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1994, he received 95.6% of the vote on his first ballot. That percentage was higher than Willie Mays, higher than Ted Williams. 2 of the most celebrated, most beloved players who ever stepped onto a baseball field. The people who watched Carlton pitch across 24 seasons, the writers and players and broadcasters who voted, knew exactly what they had witnessed every time they watched him work, and they made sure the official record reflected it without hesitation or debate. Steve Carlton was 3 things working in perfect combination inside one pitcher. The dime spin slider that no brain could track quickly enough to respond to in time. The body that never broke down and kept generating full power deep into every game and every season for more than 2 decades. And the silence that stripped the human element away from competition and left hitters facing something they had no framework for understanding and no tool for solving. Pete Rose called him the best left-handed pitcher he ever saw. Willie Stargell said eating soup with a fork was easier than hitting him. Reggie Jackson said the slider was essentially unhittable. Johnny Bench said Carlton held every card in the game. Rod Carew said there were multiple versions that all looked completely identical. George Foster said he got stronger as the game went on. Dave Winfield said Carlton made him feel like he was being ignored by something that had no interest in noticing him. Joe Morgan said the silence was its own kind of weapon. And Mike Schmidt, who watched it all from third base for years, said he was grateful every day of his career that he never had to step into that batter's box. 9 Hall of Famers. 9 completely different ways of arriving at exactly the same truth. Carlton was a beast, and for a full generation of hitters, stepping to the plate against him was not a competition. It was a lesson in what helplessness feels like when it has been perfectly designed and perfectly delivered day after day, season after season, by the greatest left-handed pitcher who ever took a baseball into his hand and decided to make the world feel it. If you made it all the way here, hit like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. Drop a comment and tell us which quote hit the hardest. The soup with a fork from Stargell, the last microsecond from Rose, or Reggie just flat out saying unhittable? Let us know down below. We will see you in the next one.